Hi everybody, welcome back to Ox Talks. Appreciate you joining today to watch the show. I appreciate the fantastic response that I'm getting to yesterday's show relative to the co-signing issue and personal guarantee issue. Obviously, a lot of us can relate to that, and it's showing in your guys' comments, your input, and the views. So I appreciate it. Please share that video and all of my other videos with as many people as you possibly can. To educate. That's what I'm trying to do, is share experiences, give you input on current economic events. And so let's continue to do this, spread the word with everybody. Let me jump right in, because the topic I want to discuss today goes to something that I see come up a lot in my law practice over the years. I have to say, unfortunately, it's always those very uncomfortable type disputes, and we'll jump right into what I'm talking about. But what got me thinking about the topic for today's video is I received an email from a viewer this morning, Roger. And Roger had sent me some photos of some damage that hurricane or tropical storm Debbie, I think it was Debbie, had done to his local community. And in this case, it was a bridge that was basically completely destroyed. And after I saw that, I responded to his email. I then came across an article on Yahoo Finance. And the article, which I'll share with you, and then I'll relate it to some cases I've had in my practice over the years. The title of the article is, "If a Neighbor's Tree Falls on Your Property, Who Has to Pay for the Damage?" And this goes for a neighbor's tree falling on your property, on your vehicle, and then of course what caused that to happen. So let me jump into the article really quickly, and then I'll circle back and we'll put some real life experience to this. Because look, we all, for the most part, we all have neighbors. Even if you live on a large parcel of property out in the country or in a rural area, at some point you have an adjoining landowner. You have a wall, you have a fence, you have a tree line, whatever that might be. So it's something that I believe all of us can glean some knowledge from. Again, not legal advice, just telling you. And by the way, these rules and laws relative to neighbor disputes vary tremendously from state to state, and sometimes even within the county rules and regulations. Okay, so again, you have to speak with legal counsel in your own local area, your own state, to determine what your rights and what your rights are and what your responsibilities are as it relates to adjoining landowners and your neighbors. So let me jump in the article. It says, this year has already seen a host of named storms. In July, Hurricane Beryl became the earliest Category 5 Atlantic storm on record, and in August, Hurricane Debbie, was a hurricane. I think it weakened to a tropical storm after that, hammered the southeast before moving upward to inflict damage on the northeast. It says it's common for homes to sustain flood damage during a hurricane. And unfortunately, that's not always covered by a standard homeowner's insurance policy. Similarly, major storms tend to send trees flying, which could lead to all sorts of problems. But what if a tree on a neighbor's property ends up falling during a storm and causing damage to your property? Whether by taking out a chunk of your fence or your wall, hitting your roof, or falling on your car. Who is responsible for that damage? The answer might surprise you. The article says, laws regarding liability are more clear in some states than others. But generally speaking, when a tree falls during a storm, it's considered an act of nature. And in many cases, it says it's not your neighbor's financial responsibility, even if it was their tree that fell from their property onto yours, causing the damage. However, there can be exceptions to this rule. And again, sometimes, folks, as a practicing attorney, sometimes the exceptions, overwhelm the rule, right? It leaves it like a piece of Swiss cheese with a bunch of holes in it. So the exceptions are always what you have to pay attention to. It says, if it can be proven that your neighbor knew about structural problems with the tree, or that it was dead or rotted, and they failed to do something about it, then you may be able to pin them for damages. For example, say you sent your neighbor a series of emails asking them to take down a dead tree that had been teetering over your fence. If the neighbor's response is basically no or to ignore you, it says, if you have a paper trail created, you may be able to use it as evidence against them. It says, but if a healthy tree falls on your property, or even an unhealthy tree whose issues were unbeknownst to you and your neighbor, then you might be the one who's going to have to deal with the damage. If you have proof, it says, that your neighbors knew that their tree was a risk, that's information that you would obviously provide to your insurance company. The insurance company could investigate, and if needed, they can go after the neighbor in what's called usually a subrogation action, seeking to be reimbursed for whatever they had to pay out to cover the damage claim. One thing you should know, though, is that if a neighbor's tree falls on your property and damages your car, your homeowner's insurance may not cover it. That would be something that you would tender to your auto carrier. Again, do your own due diligence, get your own legal advice in your area. But I wanted to read that story to you. It was very, very interesting that I just happened to see it. And it mentioned that storm, Debbie, after Roger had sent me those photos. I've been involved over the years in many of these neighbor-to-neighbor disputes, some of them involving tree issues, unstable walls, retaining walls, brick walls. I'm not going to go into encroachments in this video. We'll deal with that, easement issues, encroachments, on another video. It's for another day. But talking about when you have damage, all right? I've also had cases involving neighbors when there are shared areas of the property. For example, a shared driveway. Let me address one by one. Not too long ago, I had a tree case. A neighbor of mine lived in it was a multi-million-dollar property. There was an adjoining landowner behind her property. The landowner lived in a gated community. My client's property was not located in that gated community. Okay, so there were no covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC&Rs, or community guidelines that, let's say, applied to or governed the behavior between these two landowners, because one was inside a gated community, all right, an HOA, and one was outside the community. So what was happening is the adjoining neighbor had probably a 15-foot line of very mature ficus trees. And those ficus trees were growing over the wall into my client's property, and they would drop leaves. They were having issues with keeping those trees alive, the neighbor was, and they were shedding massive amounts of leaves that were dropping into my client's very, very expensive pool filtration system, her pool, jacuzzi, obviously making the yard unsightly, but also creating havoc with her filtration system, causing her pool people to experience a lot of frustration. So after many, many, many notices and warnings and requests to please trim the trees or do something to curb the problem, which went unattended to, she filed a lawsuit seeking an injunction. We filed the lawsuit seeking an order from the court that the neighbor basically had to take steps to prevent the situation from continuing, and just take steps to remedy the problem. And basically, as I recall, that was issued, and then what happened was the neighbor turned around and filed, and this is what can happen. That's why I'm giving you these stories, so that you take all proper precautions to do your best to resolve situations with the neighbors. Sometimes you don't have any other choice. Sometimes you may have some alternatives I'll discuss with you in a second, which is what ended up basically resolving this case. But here's what the crux of this is: that neighbor, basically, we filed the lawsuit. My client trimmed the trees that were overhanging onto her portion of the property, okay? She did not trespass on the neighboring property. She trimmed what was hanging over her property. And the adjoining landowner then basically filed a countersuit claiming that they had evidence that my client had poisoned their trees and caused these mature ficus trees to die. Obviously, that didn't happen, but the trees had been dying over time. they countersued and said that the client, by cutting the trees, caused them to die. And it became this protracted, drawn-out fight, very expensive legal fight over a tree line of ficus trees. Ultimately, what ended up happening is we got the city involved, and there were city ordinances on the books that had to do with maintaining and trimming dead trees, and there were some height restrictions and requirements that had been violated. So in this case, we were able to get the city code enforcement involved, and they ended up citing the adjoining landowner and basically, threatening basically a legal action by the city, which forced the homeowner to comply, not because we had filed suit, but because the city was threatening an abatement action against them. But they ended up eventually resolving that case at great expense, and there was another row of trees planted, some trees taken out, but it was a nightmare. So I want you guys to be aware of that, because the moral of the story here is that in every state has different laws. So do your own due diligence and homework. Get your own legal advice. However, if you take it upon yourself, at least in California, to self-help, if you will, or to not even, if you don't even go on your neighbor's property, but you trim the trees, and if that trimming, in this case, they allege that my client poisoned the trees, which was unsupported, but if you trim the trees and trimming the trees causes those trees to die, there are laws on the books that allow for legal action to be brought against you by taking those self-help actions. So, it becomes sometimes a slippery slope, a catch-22. You would think, well, why can't I, do what is needed to protect my property, to trim the trees up to the wall line or the fence line? Just be very cautious of that, okay? Now, whenever clients come in about these tree disputes or wall disputes, same thing with a wall. Okay, if a wall is falling down and it's a hazard, there are ways to redress it. But if you do something without seeking, let's say, city involvement, or if you're in a gated community, asking the homeowner association to get involved is possibly a violation of their rules and restrictions, where they can, as a third party, step in and assist with resolving the issue. Like in my other case, it ended up being city code enforcement that got that resolved. So the title of the video, to love thy neighbor or sue thy neighbor, it is a very, very, let's say, tenuous issue when you have these neighbor disputes, and there's a lot of gray area involved. Another dispute I had involved neighbors that did both live in a common interest development in California, a very nice gated community, and they had a shared driveway. And what was happening is my client was being blocked out of her garage because this neighbor always had guests and invitees and family over, and they parked in such a way in this shared use driveway that my neighbor, who was elderly, my client, who was elderly, could not get her car in and out of the garage. After months of trying to get the HOA involved to help, trying to send communications to the neighbor, politely requesting that the neighbor address the situation, it didn't happen. In this case, the HOA was not willing to, or was unable to assist and provide any, let's say, reasonable conclusion to it to get the adjoining landowner to comply. And so again, we went in on that one, filed a lawsuit, had an injunction issue, because we were claiming, in this case, elderly client, if she couldn't get her car out of the garage in the case of emergency, or couldn't get emergency vehicles into her area in the event of an emergency, that could obviously, could result in some kind of irreparable harm, major harm. So, but again, I remember that in that case, we ended up getting it resolved, but the judge just hated that case. She hated the fact that we had two older ladies battling in court over something that they should have been able to resolve among themselves. So again, a takeaway on that one, I remember it was a local judge, and she just did not want that case in her courtroom. But we had tried for months and months. It might have even been, a year. We tried to get the adjoining landowner to work with us to find a resolution for the parking issue. And it just, it seemed like it was something so minimal that could have been addressed. It blew up into a court battle. Then that lady got counsel, and it got expensive for the parties. And ultimately, we went to a mediation and resolved the issue. But it is not a very easy thing to determine, or let's say to resolve, a neighbor dispute. Again, give me your comments below. What do you know, have you guys experienced neighbor disputes? Have you been more successful in resolving those disputes amicably with your neighbor or neighbors, or have you had some things go to further than that? Have you had to get, let's say, third parties involved, like an HOA, homeowner association, or a city or a county official, code enforcement? Let me know what you guys have experienced. But as a litigator who's handled, many of these cases over my 30-year career, I can say the one takeaway is that the clients, I wish the clients would have found constructive ways to resolve the issues. Yes, the court system in some cases did resolve it after great expense and stress. Yes, there were other third parties that were able to resolve it. In one case, it was a mediator. Another case, it was a code enforcement in the local city. The HOA, I've had in other cases, has been willing to step in and help resolve neighbor disputes. But it's a big gray area. Obviously, you have the issue of insurance. If there's a damage claim like this story I just shared with you from Yahoo Finance, if a tree falls and causes damage to your roof or your property or your wall, obviously you would tender it to your insurance. Again, not financial advice, legal advice, but you would consider tendering it to your existing insurance and determine what your rights are, what your obligations are. Your deductible issues and all that stuff that goes along with making claims. And we all know that homeowners insurance has skyrocketed across the country, more states than others. But of course, when you make a claim, that further exacerbates the problem and your premiums go up even more, not to mention sometimes you have a deductible. So I get it. So it's not always an easy determination. But hopefully this was helpful. I don't want to go too long today. I went well over half an hour yesterday. I think that was too long. So I'm going to try to keep these at 20 minutes or less. Again, hope you find it helpful. Share it with people, as many as you can, and let's continue to educate. All right, that's what I'm here for, and share and hopefully help you guys through situations that you encounter as we go along. Markets were a little down today. Metals were a little bit up today, I saw. It's a weird time right now with the convention going on for the other party, and it's just very, very strange. A lot's going on in these next couple of months. I think we have Jerome Powell speaking from Jackson Hole this week in a speech, and that the market is kind of frantically awaiting his comments to see if that's going to yield, let's say, some kind of indication of rate cuts on the horizon. So lots going on. I appreciate you being here. I'm going to get my workout in about an hour. I hope all of you guys do the same thing. Get those workouts in, stay active, stay healthy, and I will talk to you all soon. Bye.